The Gottkrieg is in full swing. Also known as the Fifth Crusade, or God's War, it is the largest single war in European history, and involves essentially the entire continent, split between the League of the Stormcross and the Great Heathen Empire, and the various factions of the Anglian Civil War. Without further ado, the fighting commences. The military doctrines of the North and South are markedly different. The League of the Stormcross focuses more on formation and grand strategy, with certain units like the military orders given to specialized functions. Meanwhile, the GHE found itself employing a more general approach, with each individual soldier capable of tasks more broadly, largely due to a decentralized and even sometimes clan-based command structure. The GHE needed to ensure that no specialist division was caught out, and that no individual chief took issue with any hypothetical grand strategy beyond broad goals like, we aim to capture this region by this time, and so on. The League of the Stormcross realized its position, and wanted to press its advantage while the Anglian Civil War was still roiling at a high and distracting heat. Thus, the League opened on the offensive with a three-front push. This was characterized by several battles on the borders of the GHE. First, there was the Siege of Trier. Santonian forces, organized and bolstered from knights belonging to the Order of St. Domneu and the Order of Western Lightning, rushed the city, and instead of attempting to starve them out, sought to beat the city down and crack it open. Any approaching merchant or layman, let alone any soldier, who attempted to draw near to Trier, was killed where he stood, either picked off by gunshot from a distance, or cut down by a knight of the Order of St. Domneu, savaging him such to make an example out of him. Word got around to common folk to avoid the city, and they did so for miles around. The League bombarded the city with cannon shot and flaming arrows and giant stones launched from trebuchets day and night, and even hastily attempted a few early breaches, which were repelled. When forces from the GHE finally did arrive, they had a poor mix of mounted soldiers and footmen, and as such the Knights of St. Domneu were able to sally forth again and again to keep them safely away. Eventually, knights from the Order of Western Lightning were able to tunnel under a section of Trier's walls, collapsing it and soon flooding the city with men. The GHE attempted a suicide charge, but it did little good. The city had already fallen, illustrating the remaining strategic gap between the League and the GHE. The soldiers of the League were simply too organized, too professional, and too experienced. Things went better for the heathens during the Battle of Graz. Two military orders were involved in this operation, the Peninsular Order and the Order of the Dragon. They sought to rush in and capture the entire county from the heathens, and they thought it fairly simple at first. The mounted speed of the Peninsular Lancers and the hardy stubbornness of the Dragon Knights was thought to be a good combination, but they did not account for how different the forces of the GHE were in different parts of the Empire. Having received reports that they were ill-equipped, the League got cocky. Here, the division of warriors were well prepared, and lured the soldiers of the League into the city of Graz itself at the center of the province, only to lock the gates and come pouring out of the city's sewers, dressed in bearskins. The soldiers of the League were totally unprepared, given that these units were not specialized in urban combat, and so the League was soon repelled from the city of Graz and the wider province entirely. Regardless, as 1377 dawned with a bitterly cold January, the GHE was nonetheless feeling the heat. The League had managed to make gains on all fronts, especially given that a three-front war was almost entirely unmanageable for any people to really handle. But Emperor Waldegast did not treat it as unwinnable. He fought and fought bravely, and even fought personally in many battles, like the Battle of Breslau in the Far East with Gothonia, where he turned the tide of an unwinnable battle by charging headlong into enemy lines and hacking away with a great axe. This disregard for his own life inspired his men, who placed a great premium on bravery, glory, and acts of courage. But a fine monarch would not be enough to win them a war. By 1377, Emperor Lofgar could be seen making frequent visits to the court of Waldegast under the pretenses of visiting his daughter, and also to offer advice, which he presumed to be valuable coming from him, as he fancied himself a great man of war. Waldegast did not much care for him, though he was coming to be fond of his pretty daughter. Even if Suniva, from what the gossipers of the outside world could tell, did not quite feel the same about Waldegast. In the context of the war, 1377 saw many great feats, most of them namely carried out by Anglonia. Bold and potent beyond their size, they directed the Order of Saint Stratomartis to great effect. Indeed, they collaborated with the Order of Saint Michael and their naval fleet to carry out a daring naval invasion of Anglia's former capital, Norfolk. They utilized small, speedy vessels in the dead of night, and even overloaded these vessels with men swaddled in waxed sealskins who hooked themselves to the sides of the ships in order to maximize the amount of men piled onto the boats. They came crashing ashore and cut themselves free, scrambling onto land and rushing the city before they even knew they were under attack. King Seilanga himself led the attack, and was one of the men who leapt over the closing drawbridge into the city in order to personally savage the defenders and open the city gates so their compatriots could come rushing in. Despite this ferocity, they were also known as merciful enemies, as they refrained from killing civilians and left the women untouched, even the ladies of the street. Traditionally, Anglians despoiled everything in a city when they captured it, carrying off treasure and concubines, but the Anglonians instead took to integrating the city into their patrimony as soon as it was surely theirs, sharing the gospel as they fed and clothed the city's inhabitants and cared for the innocent injured. By 1378, the war became defined by smaller battles on a village level, as gains on the part of the League slowed down with time. The Anglian Civil War continued to rage, with Halig Teoda striking out at Eblania in the west, sovereigntist Anglia establishing itself as the dominant force in the entire Midlands, and Pictara solidifying its position in the north. The nobles of that land eventually choosing a man to crown as king over them, electing King Vapoig MacDunstan. It was also in this year that Emperor Waldegast became determined to win the heart of Suniva, not for any political sake, but because he was taken by her. This year he campaigned less and less, and when he did, he made sure to bring her something, at first sent by servant, eventually defying convention and delivering them himself. He brought her back fine ivory rosaries from a slain Lucanian knight. He brought her back an orange, an exotic fruit imported to Europe by Vasconian merchants, which he raided from a noble's villa in Santonia. He even brought her a book of myths and tales from the legendary Anglian storyteller, Alfred Jasper Sunu. At this, her countenance warmed on him. At first, she was reticent, seeing him as an awkward and strangely intense kind of man, furthermore, a man picked for her by her father. But these gifts sparked conversation, and eventually they became friends, and his demeanor softened in a way just for her, and so did hers for him. Over the discussions they'd have throughout 1378, she opened up to him. She longed for the Anglian hills, and recounted how she'd chase her brothers across them when she was young. Princess Suniva was fond of poetry, but given that the Anglians thought it was improper for a woman to be literate before her third child, she oft relied on her brothers to read it to her, and her mother to write down her poems and stories. Lofgar couldn't stand such an activity that he saw as a frivolous thing, and when her mother died, he didn't bother filling that role for her. When she finally admitted that she hadn't read the book as she wasn't able, and simply admired the pretty tome for some weeks, Waldegast offered to teach her language, and even endeavored to learn her tongue, in order to gift her a full indulgence in this art she so loved. From here, their bond would only grow closer, and for a time it was like there wasn't a war at all. At court, later on, one of the Gaudzari over a major city and its outlying regions came to him, and, in advising the king of the situation in the west, the two got into a heated disagreement. The visiting Gautzar made a mockery of Waldegast, calling him a soft poet king, fit for the white sands of Italy more than the grit of the north. Waldegast challenged him to a duel, and it was arranged forthwith. The style of duels in the north were with Scythian-style pistols at 10 paces. The tension was high, and only enough time had gone by to deliver the firearms for the duel before it began. At the shot, Waldegast was safe, while the Gautsar caught a mark to the cheek. The Gautsar raged, and threw his knife at the Emperor, catching him in the shoulder, and shouting all the while, "So you're a lousy shot too, my lord. Go back to your silly waifish girl. Enjoy the whore price that the Anglians have bought you with." At this, Waldegast took a stone, considered its weight, and pitched it at the Gautsar's fat face, beaming him between the eyes, at which he collapsed into a heap on the ground, a dead man. The Gautsari knew not to cross their savage lord, who dragged out gifts for his beloved from the scores of men he's killed. Suniva would come to care for his wounds, and as he recovered, she'd fall for him as well. Before the year was out, she'd be with child, and the two would be wed. Lofgar, of course, was overjoyed, and came to spend most of his time at the court of Waldegast, fawning over the young couple, and prognosticating about the security of the succession. Eventually, though, his duties would call him back to the Isles, where he, along with his sons, staged a campaign to drive out the Anglonians in early 1379. This was a successful campaign, though Waldegast would lose his life in the fighting. According to his wishes, this would mean that the crowns of Anglia and the GHE would merge, but one of his sons resisted this order, the youngest, named Wulfstan Wicpersunu. Wulfstan, acting independently, had his brothers killed, and commanded his sister to renounce her claim of the crown of Anglia. She, to his surprise, refused, and as such, Anglia, which was supposed to be the GHE's greatest ally, now became a dangerous enemy. 1379 would see the Great Heathen Empire beaten back yet further, every victory chased at its heels by another defeat somewhere else. The only front which was proving successful was the front with Anglonia, where their south was being whittled away by heathen forces. Waldegast was now quite literally surrounded, but even that was manageable in the face of his greatest challenge: finances. The GHE had an inefficient tax system which was rendered mostly in kind, and as such the immense amounts of gold necessary to fund such a war as this simply weren't there. So soon had he been forced to change his payment to soldiers from gold to silver, and was now even tempted to debase the currency to stretch his limited supply of precious metals even further. The League was also having trouble paying for the Fifth Crusade, though, with so much more wealth accrued from generations of trade and cooperation between the most civilized nations in all the world, they had much more of a buffer to work with. This was also the year that Lucania had its victory over Sicily, annexing them entirely. This factors into the financial tale particularly well. Sicily, a trade kingdom of many nationalities, had long practiced a form of monetary manipulation it learned from Pyrrhian traders long ago. It was common practice for merchants to leave large sums in safe ports to be stored and picked up later, and it was also common to pay the holder of your wealth a small fee to hold and protect it. Pyrrhian merchants that set up shop in Sicily began practicing something which was totally illegal throughout the League of the Storm Cross, and that was the practice of charging interest on loans. By another name, this was usury, explicitly condemned in the Bible, and punishable by death in the League of the Storm Cross. However, in Sicily, the wealth it generated for lenders became a kind of cottage industry, and moneylenders from every walk of life made themselves rich in this way. Men, down on their luck, even made secret trips to Sicily in order to acquire larger loans than would otherwise be available from a normal moneyman in the League. Eventually, the practice of holding money for a fee and the practice of usury fed into each other, with this stored money and the fees accrued being able to be loaned out and then reimbursed to other people as they came to pick up their funds, all the time making profits for the money changer. Eventually, the people who held money and the people who practiced usury became one and the same. Indeed, as the Sicilian crown brought this business under its direct purview, it generated such wealth that they were able to persist outside of the League of the Storm Cross for quite a long time, and was even able to compete with the prices offered by League merchants. Yes, some men were ruined, tossed into debtor prisons or worse, and indeed a financial crisis or two did threaten the obliteration of all they had, but in the end they accepted this as the price of doing business, and the wages of mammon kept flowing into their coffers. Now, with Sicily dead and gone, the Peninsular Order made it their first item of business to raid the cities and kill any money changers they found there, forgiving all debts and requisitioning their ill-gotten gold as property of the crown. Those that survived the nights and evaded the Inquisition were able to risk life and limb to practice that trade which had marked them forever, in a new land, the unbounded North. With the Great Heathen Empire simply running out of money, with an inefficient tax system in which taxes disappeared due to corruption and bribery, and precious few other avenues of income, these refugees of Sicilian, Lucanian, Pierian, and Vasconian origin offered a possible avenue for income that was shameful as it was anywhere else, but simply too lucrative for the crown to ignore. In 1379, Waldegast would do small-scale business with these usurers, collecting substantial taxed income off of the interest they charged to private individuals. Even if it put a bad taste in his mouth, at the very least it was foreigners dirtying their hands with such shameful work. Little did he know, but this little business would grow as the war did, even if now it was but a few loans here or there. Nonetheless, it provided just enough of a lifeline the GHE needed to keep grinding its way through the Gottkrieg. Then, at the very end of 1379, as the Gottkrieg seemed absurd in its complexity and scale, thundering hooves arrived from the east to finally tip the scales and bring this war to its conclusion, once and for all.